The Cathar Imperium was built on data. Theirs was a civilization of meticulous record keepers, of archivists and actuaries, of beings who believed that with enough information, perfectly catalogued and flawlessly analyzed, the future could be predicted, controlled, and perfected. The Cathar themselves were tall, gaunt figures, their six-limbed bodies moving with precise, deliberate grace. Their large, multifaceted eyes were capable of processing vast streams of visual data simultaneously. Their societal ideal was the immaculate record, a theoretical state where all past and present events were so thoroughly documented that all future probabilities could be calculated with near certainty. When the Cathar encountered humanity, their initial assessment was one of profound disappointment, bordering on intellectual disdain. Human history, as far as the Cathar could tell from preliminary scans of Earth's chaotic public data networks, was a horrifying mess. It was a jumble of conflicting narratives, myths intertwined with facts, emotionally charged rhetoric substituting for objective analysis. Their historians, the Cathar observed, often seemed more like poets or propagandists than dispassionate chroniclers of events. How could any species with such a flawed understanding of its own past possibly navigate the complexities of the galactic stage? Species 7349. Terran, human, read the initial Cathar assessment. Historical records, fragmented, unreliable, heavily biased by emotional interpretations. Predictive capability based on said records. Negligible. Threat opportunity index. Minimal. They are, in essence, children scribbling conflicting stories in the sand, oblivious to the incoming tide. Human historians were dismissed as narrative artisans, their work more akin to fanciful fiction than the rigorous data-driven chronologies the Cathar revered. It was with this paternalistic, if somewhat condescending, attitude that the Cathar Imperium dispatched a philanthropic archival delegation to Earth. Their stated mission: to assist humanity in organizing its historical data into a coherent, verifiable record, a gift of Cathar clarity to a clearly muddled species. The unspoken mission: to gather enough reliable baseline data to accurately slot humanity into the Cathar's grand predictive models of galactic development. The delegation was led by High Archivist Vorhesh, a Cathar whose personal data vaults contain the verified histories of 36 minor civilizations. Accompanying him were specialists in data scrubbing, timeline verification, and socioeconomic modeling. And as was standard, a few junior archivists for the less critical data sifting tasks. One of these was trainee archivist Zil. Zil was young, by Cathar standards only a few centuries into his training, and possessed a trait somewhat unusual for a Cathar: a flicker of unconventional curiosity. While his seniors focused on official government records and established academic archives, Zil found himself drawn to the periphery, the vast, uncurated digital oceans of human creativity, speculation, and even their entertainment. The human authorities, flattered by the attention from a major galactic power, granted the Cathar delegation broad access to their digital archives. They proudly presented their national libraries, their university databases, their census records. Vorhesh and his team began the painstaking process of cross-referencing, filtering out what they deemed narrative contamination, and building their corrected timeline of human events. It was, in their view, like cleaning a hopelessly cluttered attic. Zil assigned to analyze ancillary cultural data streams, a task Vorhesh considered busy work, began his exploration. He waded through human fiction, their novels, their films, their complex video games. He examined their academic journals in fields the Cathar had barely considered part of history, disciplines like sociology, psychohistory, a human concept that initially made Vorhesh snort with derision, epidemiology, eschatology, and a truly bizarre field called cli-fi or climate fiction. He looked at their economic models, not just the official ones, but the speculative, often dystopian projections made by independent analysts. He delved into their military doctrines, not just the sanitized public versions, but the classified war games, the contingency plans for catastrophic global conflicts, societal breakdown, and even asteroid impacts or engineered pandemics. At first, it seemed to confirm the Cathar prejudice, a species obsessed with disaster, constantly imagining their own demise in lurid detail. Their fiction was rife with apocalypses, their academic papers filled with dire warnings. Emotionally driven threat inflation, Zill noted in his preliminary report, echoing his superior's sentiments. But as Zill cross-referenced these ancillary data points with the official historical records Vorhesh was so meticulously assembling, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. He started with a simple query: instances of societal collapse in human history. The Cathar had records of civilizations that had collapsed, of course. Usually, it was due to a single, identifiable primary cause: resource depletion, overwhelming external aggression, a catastrophic natural disaster. The Cathar predictive models were good at identifying these tipping points. Human history, however, showed collapses that were messier, more complex. Often it wasn't one thing but a confluence of factors: environmental degradation, internal political fracturing, economic inequality, technological disruption, and a failure of social cohesion, all interacting in a feedback loop. And their historians, the ones the Cathar dismissed as storytellers, didn't just record the what. They delved deeply, obsessively into the how and the why. They debated causality. They built intricate models of societal fragility. They even, Zill noted with a jolt, seemed to draw lessons from these ancient collapses and apply them to contemporary concerns. He found a human academic paper from the early 21st century. Its title was innocuous: Comparative Analysis of Collapse Dynamics in Bronze Age Civilizations. But its methodology was anything but. The human historian had used advanced statistical modeling, climate data, archaeological evidence, and even textual analysis of surviving records to create a disturbingly robust model of how multiple stressors could lead to systemic failure. The paper didn't just describe the past. It offered a clear, chilling warning about similar, cascading failure points in the author's own contemporary global civilization. Zill ran a search. The author of that paper was not some fringe theorist. They were a respected academic, and their work had been cited, debated, and built upon by thousands of other human scholars, economists, and even urban planners. This wasn't just storytelling. This was analysis. Deep, relentless, brutal self-analysis. Zill then stumbled upon the human concept of wargaming, not just at a tactical military level, but at a strategic, societal level. He found records of exercises where human leaders and thinkers simulated responses to global pandemics far more lethal than any they had yet experienced. He found detailed projections of the consequences of nuclear exchanges, not just the immediate destruction, but the decades-long nuclear winter and societal breakdown that would follow. He found economic stress tests that modeled the collapse of global financial systems with terrifying plausibility. They weren't just predicting disaster, they were dissecting it, examining its every component, trying to understand its mechanics. And then there was the fiction. Zill had initially dismissed it as morbid fantasy, but now he saw it differently. So many of their stories, their post-apocalyptic novels, their dystopian films, their intricate world-building for games, were not just escapism. They were thought experiments. Humans were using narrative to explore the ragged edges of societal resilience. What happens when the power grid fails? When communication breaks down? When trust in institutions evaporates? When a new technology fundamentally alters what it means to be human? They played out these scenarios, again and again, in 1,000 different variations. Zill brought his findings to Vorhesh, his multifaceted eyes blinking with a nervousness his superior had never witnessed in a trainee. "High Archivist," Zill began, presenting his linked data streams. "I believe our initial assessment of Terran historical methodology may be incomplete." Vorhesh, annoyed at the interruption, scanned Zill's data with impatience. "Incomplete. Trainee Archivist, their records are a disaster. We are bringing order to their chaos. What is this collection of fanciful doomseeing you have brought me? Focus on verifiable facts, Zill, not their nightmares." "With respect, High Archivist," Zill persisted, a tremor in his voice, I do not believe these are just nightmares. Or if they are nightmares they actively study. Look at this correlation. A popular Terran fictional series from their late 20th century detailed a specific type of societal breakdown following a biological agent. 2 decades later, when a less severe but structurally similar real-world event occurred, some of the societal adaptation strategies and even ethical frameworks discussed in that fiction were openly referenced in their public discourse and policy debates. Voorhees paused. He re-examined the data point. It was unsettlingly accurate. They are not just recording their past, Zill continued, gaining a fraction of confidence. They are constantly simulating potential futures, especially catastrophic ones. They're historians, they're scientists, they're artists. They are engaged in a continuous, species-wide analysis of existential threats. They study how civilizations die. They catalog failure points. They wargame societal collapse with a thoroughness that our own immaculate record protocols have never deemed necessary, because we assume our systems are too robust to fail in such a manner. Voorhees was silent for a long moment, his 6 arms perfectly still, his eyes processing Zill's cross-referenced data with increasing speed. He pulled in more data streams. Human studies on mass extinctions in their planet's geological past, their obsessive tracking of near-Earth asteroids, their public health organizations dedicated to preventing pandemics, their philosophical debates on the ethics of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. Technologies the Cathar themselves had handled with extreme, centralized caution. Humans were openly, chaotically, and globally debating risks the Cathar only discussed in sealed High Council chambers. The "oh shit" revelation, as humans might have termed it, settled upon High Archivist Voorhees with the weight of a collapsing star. These humans, with their messy, emotional, contradictory history, were not naive children scribbling in the sand. They were survivors of a planetary death trap, a world that had thrown ice ages, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, and countless plagues at them. Their history wasn't a clean, curated Cathar data scroll because it was a record of surviving that chaos, of learning, adapting, and sometimes, barely, clawing their way back from the brink. Their historians weren't just storytellers. They were the inheritors of a long tradition of civilizational autopsy. They dissected the corpses of their own past failures and the failures of others to understand the pathologies of collapse. Their fiction wasn't just entertainment. It was a cultural immune system, constantly generating antibodies against future threats by imagining them into existence first. They had a deep, culturally ingrained, almost obsessive understanding of how things fall apart, and by extension, a desperate, often fumbling but incredibly resilient drive to figure out how to hold them together or how to rebuild when they didn't. Voorhees thought of the Cathar Imperium, so stable, so orderly, so confident in its immaculate record and its predictive models. But what if a truly novel threat emerged? Something their models hadn't anticipated, something that didn't fit their neatly defined parameters of civilizational risk. The Cathar had not experienced a true systemic crisis in millennia. Would they even know how to react? Would their rigid, data-driven society be capable of the kind of messy, desperate improvisation that seemed to be humanity's specialty? The Cathar delegation cut its philanthropic archival mission short. Voorhees cited unexpected complexities in Terran data structures requiring further internal Cathar consultation. The departure was polite, but swift. The report Voorhees delivered to the Cathar High Council was not the one he had intended to write. Species 7349. Terran, human, the new assessment began. Historical methodology appears chaotic, but is a highly adaptive system of continuous existential threat analysis and societal resilience modeling. Their historians, across multiple disciplines, are de facto experts in the mechanics of civilizational failure and survival. Their fictional narratives often serve as distributed thought experiments for extreme contingency scenarios. Conclusion: Terrans possess a unique and profoundly disturbing cultural adaptation. They do not merely learn from history, they dissect its corpses to arm themselves against future extinction. Their understanding of how civilizations die is unparalleled, born from millennia of direct and studied experience. While their predictive capability in the Cathar sense is limited by their emotional data contamination, their reactive and adaptive capability in the face of systemic crisis may be formidable. They are, in essence, a species of doomsayers who lived. Further study is urgently recommended, with extreme caution regarding underestimation of their societal resilience. Cathar Imperium didn't suddenly embrace humanity as equals, but their perception shifted profoundly. Human historians, once dismissed as storytellers, were now viewed with a mixture of horror and grudging respect. Humanity's messy data became a subject of intense, worried study. Perhaps some younger Cathar scholars began to whisper there was something to be learned from a species that danced so willingly with the ghosts of its own potential demise, and somehow kept finding a way to survive. Humanity, unaware of the existential angst they had triggered in their meticulous alien visitors, continued to write their stories, argue about their past, and worry about their future, honing the very skills that made them such an unnerving enigma to the keepers of the immaculate record.